For one reason or another, sometimes it just doesn't work out for a certain player, at a certain club, or in a certain country. Just take someone like Arjen Robben, who was forced out of Real Madrid following just 2 seasons at the club, with Real even willing to take a €9 million loss on the Dutchman just to get him out of the door. Robben then headed to Bayern Munich, where, over the next 10 years, he scored 144 goals in 309 games, won 20 trophies, and cemented his reputation as one of the finest wide players of his generation. Sometimes, that's just the way things turn out, and the idea that players flop particularly often in the Premier League because it's a much tougher league is a bit of a myth. Plenty of foreign arrivals to the Premier League have actually found life easier in the English game than they have done overseas, and an 11 of those players might make for an interesting video in the future. Today we're dealing with Premier League flops and rejects though, and who qualifies as a Premier League flop or reject is a topic that is likely to be of some debate. I'm looking for players who never really got going in the Premier League at all, and when they were sold, their clubs were happy to get them off their books. Those are the 2 main criteria. This is a current 11 based on current ability, so there'll be no Diego Forlan, Andrei Shevchenko, or Juan Sebastian Veron. Without further ado then, here is my best 11 that truly flopped in the Premier League. Goalkeeper, Steve Mandanda. Some people might point to Wojciech Szczesny between the sticks, but having joined Arsenal's youth ranks for nothing, he went on to play 181 games for the Gunners, so I don't think it would be right to call him a flop. Just someone who has got much better since departing the Premier League. Steve Mandanda is a bona fide Premier League flop though, and an enormously disappointing one at that. When Crystal Palace signed Mandanda in 2016, it was seen as a real coup by the South Londoners. Capped more than 30 times by France, the veteran shot-stopper was part of the France squad that had just finished second at Euro 2016, and he was the League and Goalkeeper of the Year the previous season. He was unfortunate to spend much of his sole season at Selhurst Park out injured, but even when fit, he failed to impress, registering only 9 Premier League appearances and playing second fiddle to Wayne Hennessy. He swiftly returned to Marseille, becoming a regular once again, and he has won his 5th League and Goalkeeper of the Year award since then. Right back, Danilo. One of a number of fullbacks to have been signed at great expense by Manchester City, Brazilian international Danilo set the Citizens back a reported £26.5 million. An intelligent and versatile fullback who previously played in central midfield, Danilo seemed tailor-made to succeed under Pep Guardiola, but it didn't turn out that way. Kyle Walker held down his spot at right back, for the most part, with the majority of Danilo's appearances coming at left back, where he rarely caught the eye. He was swiftly sold to Juventus in a player plus cash exchange deal, which saw João Cancelo head in the opposite direction. Cancelo has been much more impressive than Danilo at the Etihad, meanwhile Danilo has found a new role on the right of a back 3 under Andrea Pirlo at times this season. Centre-back, Jerome Boateng. Perhaps the most debatable inclusion in this entire 11, I think it is harsh, but just about justifiable, to describe Jerome Boateng as a Premier League flop. Signed by Manchester City from Hamburg in 2010, he was jointly unveiled here alongside Alexander Kolarov, David Silva and Yaya Toure. Whilst the other 3 either became first-team regulars or certified club legends, Boateng only ever made 16 Premier League appearances for the club and grew frustrated with being played out of position. Despite seeing himself as a centre-back, he featured largely at right-back in England, and 12 months on from his arrival, when Bayern Munich began sniffing, he demanded a move. Man City didn't put up too much of a fight, hence why he features, and over the next few years, he became one of the most complete centre-backs on the planet in Bavaria, and he's still an excellent centre-back now. Centre-back, Stefan Savic. Making it 3 successive former Manchester City players, despite only being 4 players into this 11, Steve Mandanda's closest competitor for the number 1 shirt was also a former Citizen, although we will come to the substitutes and honourable mentions later on. There was no lack of options at centre-back, but given his increasingly assured performances for Atletico Madrid, I think that Stefan Savic is the right choice. Brought to the Etihad for £6 million from Partizan Belgrade, Savic was another one-season wonder in Premier League terms. He looked a little rough around the edges during his time in England, as you might expect from a young centre-back, but following a handful of costly errors, Man City decided that they had seen enough. Savic rebuilt his reputation in Serie A with Fiorentina, and he has since become a dependable figure in Diego Simeone's formidable backline in the Spanish capital. Left back, Yuri Berchiche. The first player in this 11, and perhaps the only one, in which a large number of you probably don't even know that he previously played for a Premier League team, Yuri Berchiche, often simply referred to as Yuri, actually spent 3 seasons at Tottenham Hotspur. A native of the Basque Country, Yuri joined the Tottenham youth ranks in 2007, and the following year he began training with the first team. Best known during his time in England for a dangerous tackle on Henry Lansbury during his time on loan at Cheltenham Town, Berchiche failed to break through at Spurs, departing to join third-tier Spanish outfit Real Union on a free transfer. Transfers to Real Sociedad, Paris Saint-Germain, and most recently Athletic Bilbao followed, and the 30-year-old is now among the most accomplished fullbacks within the Spanish game. Holding midfield, Paulinho. The stakes are raised in holding in central midfield where there is a real wealth of competition, but I feel that Paulinho is worthy of a starting berth at the base of our midfield. Of all the players in this 11, Paulinho is the one whose performances in England came as the biggest disappointment to me. Having looked really impressive for Brazil in the lead up to his move to Tottenham as an all-action midfielder with an eye for goal, I thought £17 million was good business for the Brazilian. However, Paulinho was just totally out of sorts during his time at White Hart Lane. He looked lost in midfield, and his passing and shooting were wayward consistently. Spurs sold Paulinho to Chinese outfit Guangzhou Evergrande, and Paulinho has since impressed in both the Chinese Super League and in his sole season at Barcelona. Central midfield, Luis Alberto. The second best player in this 11 by my reckoning, and quite possibly the most gifted of the lot, Luis Alberto is aging like a fine wine at Lazio. Previously signed by Liverpool for just £6.8 million in 2013, Alberto had an eminently forgettable 12 months at Anfield, despite the fact that he was at the club when they so narrowly missed out on the Premier League title. Following his 12 appearances, only 9 of which came in the league, the Spaniard was snapped up by Lazio for around half the fee that Liverpool had paid for him. He turned out to be one of the bargains of the decade, and last season his assist numbers were right up there with the likes of Lionel Messi, Thomas Muller and Kevin De Bruyne. A magnificent passer of the ball who is always looking to put Lazio on the front foot, Alberto had 21 goal contributions in 36 Serie A games last season, and his inclusion in this 11 was never in doubt. Central midfield, Mikhail Mourinho. There have been a handful of immensely talented players who have struggled at Newcastle United for one reason or another and succeeded elsewhere, although Mikhail Mourinho is the only one to make my starting 11. Signed by the Magpies for a modest £6.3 million following a season on loan at St James's Park, the young midfielder only played 25 games for Newcastle in all competitions across both campaigns, failing to make much of a lasting impression. However, he has gone from strength to strength since leaving the Premier League in 2018 to join Real Sociedad. A fantastic box-to-box midfielder who combines brains and brawn to fantastic effect alongside David Silva these days, Mourinho established himself in Spain's midfield in 2020 despite fierce competition. Right wing, Serge Gnabry. The standout name in this 11 at this moment in time, Serge Gnabry has been in outstanding form for Bayern Munich for the last 2.5 years. Arsenal originally agreed to sign Gnabry from Stuttgart for £100,000 when he was only 15 years old. Gnabry had some fitness problems at the Emirates, and Arsenal never seemed quite sure what his best position would be. An infamously underwhelming loan spell at West Bromwich Albion was the final nail in Gnabry's Premier League coffin, and he was sold to Werder Bremen for just £5 million. It proved to be the perfect move, and a young and hungry Gnabry proved his class in Bremen, earning himself a move to Bayern Munich. The Bavarians Player of the Year in 2018-19, and even more impressive as they won the treble in 2019-20, he would now walk into almost any 11 in world football. Left wing, Memphis Depay. Whilst Paulinho was the Premier League flop that surprised me the most in this 11, I suspect for many football fans that it was this man. The excitement surrounding Memphis Depay's move to Manchester United was immense following the Dutchman's excellent season at PSV. Comparisons to Cristiano Ronaldo were made before Depay had even laced up a pair of boots at Old Trafford, and the expectations proved to be too much for a young man at a team going through a transition period. There was the odd glimpse of class, mostly in Europe, but ultimately Depay could only bag 2 goals in 33 Premier League outings, and his departure eventually became inevitable. He joined Lyon in 2016, where he has since scored 62 goals in 154 games. Make no mistake, he can still be inconsistent, but Depay is electric at his best, and he has been a star man for both club and country for the last 3 years. Centre forward, Iago Aspas. I contemplated playing Depay through the middle, which is where he tends to play these days, and bring in one of the many wide options on the left flank, but ultimately, I think that Iago Aspas has to feature. Our second former Liverpool player, like Alberto, Aspas' only season at Anfield was that 2013-14 campaign in which they were just pipped to the Premier League title. In fact, if either Aspas or Alberto had shown anything like the form they've shown since leaving Liverpool during that campaign, they'd have probably got their hands on the league title 6 years earlier than they did. Aspas currently leads both the La Liga scoring charts and assist charts, which is pretty remarkable for a 33-year-old who plays for Celta Vigo. Aspas returned to Celta in 2015, having failed to score in 15 Premier League appearances for Liverpool, and he has scored 111 goals in 211 games for his boyhood club since then, often ensuring their Premier League survival. A magnificent forward who seems to flourish as a big fish in a small pond, Aspas' record is made all the more impressive by the fact that he doesn't play as an out-and-out centre-forward. That is the starting 11 done and dusted, but there is the small matter of the substitutes, a manager, and possibly even some honourable mentions still to come. As backup to Steve Mandanda, we have Chilean veteran Claudio Bravo, who may have put in some impressive cup performances for Manchester City, but was still an enormous flop in the Premier League, so much so that he was replaced by Ederson after just 12 months. Serving as our backup centre-back and giving Stefan Savic a tough fight for a starting berth is fellow La Liga star Gabriel Paulista. Signed by Arsenal for £13.5 million, Gabriel was sold for a loss following 2 underwhelming seasons, but he has looked solid even as the world collapses around him at Valencia since 2017. Adding no lack of versatility to our 7-man bench is Juan Cuadrado, who can obviously cover at fullback, wing-back, or as an out-and-out wide man. The Colombian technically spent 2 years contracted to Chelsea, where he played only 13 Premier League games, and he has been at Juventus ever since. He's joined by fellow Serie A star Martin de Roon, who joined Middlesbrough for £12 million in 2016, got relegated, and immediately returned to Atalanta. He has since played a pivotal role in Atalanta's rise under Gianpiero Gasperini, meanwhile Middlesbrough are now managed by Neil Warnock. Staying in Serie A for the third consecutive inclusion, next up is Roma star Henrik Mkhitaryan, who flopped at not one, but 2 different Premier League teams. Everyone knew Mkhitaryan had bags of talent, he proved that at Borussia Dortmund, but he could never quite click into action in England. He has been superb for Roma so far this season though, and in truth, he was unfortunate not to make my starting 11. Lastly, in the forward areas, we have Florian Thauvin and Suso. Thauvin looked hopeless at Newcastle United, but enjoyed a couple of magnificent seasons after returning to Marseille, and he is now a World Cup winner. Suso signed for Liverpool from Cadiz as a U-team player, but he failed to find the back of the net or impress in his 14 Premier League outings for the Reds. He departed for AC Milan, where he often provided a rare bright spark in a struggling Rossoneri side, and he now plays for Sevilla, with whom he won the Europa League last season. A particularly honourable mention, given that he only narrowly missed out on both the starting 11 and the bench, goes to former Aston Villa man Jordan Verity. I should point out in terms of some omissions, in case there is any confusion, that someone like Romelu Lukaku is never a Premier League flop in a million years. He was superb in the Premier League and would have likely become one of the division's all-time top scorers had he stuck around, and the fact that Manchester United sold him for around £75 million does not make him a flop. Angel Di Maria may be a more debatable inclusion, but only 2 players made more assists than the Argentine during his solitary Premier League campaign, therefore I think he was simply too good to be considered a true flop like those included. The same goes for Dusan Tadic, who, whilst much better for Ajax than he ever was for Southampton, still had 3 very decent seasons in the Premier League and was often really impressive. Someone like Gerard Piqué I didn't feel met the necessary criteria either, given that he was still very young, he did a fine job on the occasion in which he got a game, and he didn't become a regular only due to the brilliance of Rio Ferdinand and Nemanja Vidic. I didn't include any players who were only ever on loan in the Premier League, like Dani Parejo, or any players who are only currently on loan outside of the Premier League, like Angelino at RB Leipzig or Timmy Bakayoko. Hopefully, that clears up some of those omissions. Before I leave you, I must pick a manager, although it is particularly difficult to decide which managers were and weren't flops, at least in my eyes, even more so than it was with players. Could Ronald Koeman fit the bill? Maurizio Sarri, Javi Gracia, Marco Silva, Gus Poyet, Roberto Martinez, Unai Emery? I think all would be fairly controversial, since all did at least some good, and just getting sacked as a manager doesn't make you a flop, given that virtually every manager gets sacked at some stage these days. So, in the end, I went for Gareth Southgate, who had a less than 30% win percentage at Middlesbrough and was eventually relegated. So, I'd say he's a safe candidate. That is all from me for today, but I thank you all as ever for watching. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, and do just double check that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. I mean, it would be foolish not to at this stage. You can also find me on Twitter or Instagram by the username @HITC Sevens on both platforms, should you feel so inclined.